Live from the internet, it's the Narrative After Show. Bringing you the entire week in review. Now, please welcome tonight's guests and your host, Zev Shalev.
How's that for an introduction? You haven't seen that one, Sandy, have you?
Wow, it's like Vegas.
It is like Vegas. Yes, we're going to ask you to do a little dance for us in a few minutes, if you don't
Tip your
mind.
waitresses, right?
You can get
I'll
tips.
be here all week. I'll be here all week.
Thank you for being here tonight, Sandy. It's great to be with you. And on the very far end of the screen, Kaivan Shroff, who is a Democratic commentator and a smart dude all around. He does a lot of this incredible work on his own, on social media, and as a commentator on television in various places. And he's also worked in the Hillary Clinton campaign way back when. Remember those good days when the world was still normal?
Your emails.
Where are her emails anyhow? It's been, let me ask you, Kaivan, if you think about all the time that's been spent since that election day, like the world has changed so much. Can you even contrast the two time periods in your life?
People, I think the media thought it was an overreaction when Secretary Clinton said she was the last thing standing between us and the apocalypse, and yet here we are just a few short years later. So
it's unbelievable. We're not at apocalypse yet. We might be getting there shortly, but I don't think. hopefully, we've avoided it a little bit. I view. I, for one, think that the current president is doing a great job. So hopefully we're still on the path of still being a free and independent and liberal country. We never know if that's going to stick around in the future. But,
I appreciate your optimism.
I think I'm the only
great work. So I think it's an all hands on deck moment.
It for sure is an all hands on deck moment, and it is a critical time in our history. But America's always done well in critical times, and the free people of the world have always done well in critical times. So I'm hopeful for all of that. I was excited to have both of you on together because, even though Sandy looks like she's, barely out of her 30s, she is not. She's can we tell you how old you are?
Yeah,
are we allowed
sure.
to say?
Pushing 80.
Well, pushing 80. Is that right? Pushing 80? Is that right? No.
77.
77.
That's closer to 80 than 70.
Yeah, I know, but it's still 3 years away. But still, what? And then Kaivan, you're 28, I gather, right? So you're very much younger than Sandy and much younger than I, because I'm 48. And so we've got three different generations here. We've got, I'd be Generation X. You'd be a boomer.
I'm a war baby. No, I'm a war baby.
A war baby.
I was born during World War II.
Right.
I was born in 1944.
Oh, wow. So, and so then, Kaivan, you'll be a millennial, I think. Is that right? Lucky you. Oh, we don't have a boomer here that you can go, okay, boomer to. Maybe Sandy will play that role. Yeah. But, it is interesting because, you got a little bit of context here in terms of understanding the world. Sandy's been around for a little longer than you and I have, Kaivan, and you've got a long way to go. So maybe we can think about how to save America's future together tonight. And we've also got our fans joining us on narrative.org/TV. If you want to interact with the show, that's where you've got to go, because that's where we will see all your messages and we'll be able to put your messages on screen. So that's narrative.org/TV. People are saying Sandy.
Oh, they are?
Yes, they are.
God.
So in fact, I had to check this before we got on the air because I didn't want to make any assumptions about people's, generations here. So I pulled up a graphic to show us the different kinds of generations. And I was surprised by how many there are of each of these different groups, because there are 74 million baby boomers.
Wow.
74 million. That's a lot. There's only 50 million of us Gen Xers, 83 million millennials. There's so many of you.
Wow.
And then 86 million Gen Zs.
What is it? What age is that? 96 to 2015.
50. Yeah. So they're still in school basically, or almost coming out of school. That's interesting. That makes the world really not belong to you and me anymore, Sandy. It feels like the world belongs to the millennials and the Gen Zs of the world. So we can hand it over as we
I hate to tell you this, but you know how many people voted for Trump? 74 million.
So you think that's all the 65 plus?
No, Nick Fuentes pointed that out to me. He said 74 million of us voted for Trump and we're not going anywhere. Although after what Pence said today, I'm very encouraged.
That was good. Wasn't that impressive?
Yeah.
I thought Pence was, Pence really did save the Republic. And I know it's not like he did it well. He wasn't like the brave hero who stormed in and just on his own volition saved us all from the end of democracy. But it was in his hands at the end of the day, partly, to delay that vote. And he chose not to. He could have. He could have caused chaos if he wanted to. He chose not to. So maybe, he's not as bad a dude as we all might think he is.
Or I guess in his own words, he didn't choose because it was not within his authority.
It's true.
He couldn't choose. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
but it's true. But ultimately, yes, it's true. That's true. You're absolutely right.
But he was saying all day, Trump was saying, Mike Pence has the courage because if he doesn't, I'm not going to like him anymore. He's actually said that.
Yeah, you're not going to be my friend anymore.
I'm not going to be your friend. I think he said that to him.
I think he did. Those were the exact words. I'm not going to be your friend.
You're not going to be my friend anymore.
So this is what Pence has said this evening. President Trump is wrong. I mean, unbelievable that Pence has said those words. I had no right to overturn the election. And then he said the presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president. That is a hell of a statement.
And where he said it, Zev.
He said it at the Federalist Society,
who owns the government anyway. So, I mean, it's obviously went past their naming committee.
Own the government. Did they own the government? They own parts of it.
Well, they put the whole Supreme Court in.
Yes.
Barr was a Federalist, right?
Right.
Right, which, by the way, I believe that this is sort of the same lineup that Justice Gorsuch is participating in this weekend, which is closed to press. Just totally inappropriate and unethical.
Right.
I saw you posted that on your feed, and I'm actually stunned that that's happening. I mean, I know they're all members of the Federalist Society because we know that, but it's just ridiculous that they are, would openly associate while they're on the court. I mean, they're meant to be impartial, at least when they're on the court. And,
right. And I mean, as much as Pence's comments, on this are getting a lot of attention, just before that, he was bashing, Roe and how we have to overturn it. So what does it say that, Gorsuch is right there as this incredibly political partisan event is occurring. And I think, unfortunately, at a time, or maybe fortunately, because people are waking up to this reality, but distrust in the Supreme Court is, at an all-time high. And I think that when justices engage in this type of behavior, it only exacerbates that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's really, really horrendous. Before we get further into that, that's a good sidebar conversation, and I would really want to get back into it. But let's talk about Pence a little bit more, because, Sandi, you were there on January the 6th, right? You were there when the word came out. I guess they came around with megaphones, and they started telling people, Pence is a traitor. And when you were outside covering the coup. There
were the guys. I was in this weird place, which I thought after the fact, this is a weird word for it, but I was in the kind of the boring place because all my friends were inside. And
I don't know. You got some good video. You got really good video that day.
Yeah, so, but when I finally posted my timeline, people said, wow, we've never seen this before. This is really great. Yeah. And I was with the regular MAGAs, not the Oath Keepers and the Proud Boys and the real heavy insurrectionists. But after, actually, this guy, Barrett, is that his name? He was just sentenced today, or he had a sentencing hearing. He was in Pelosi's office. What was his name?
I can't remember his name.
Yeah, he was just saying, I filmed him. And also the guy next to him, this was at the end of the day, and the guy says, I'm going to read a message from the president. Now, it's 4:30 in the afternoon, 4:30.
Right.
And it's winding down. There was a 6 o'clock curfew, and people were coming out, and they were covered in blood. And I had no idea they were inside, by the way. They were coming out, tear gas and stuff. And he said... And he read the tweet that Trump sent at 2:24 in the afternoon, which Mike Pence didn't have the courage. Right. I think he changed the tense. Give us the opportunity to certify a corrected set of facts.
Right.
And that made no sense to me. And then when the story broke about the fake electorates, it just...
But we were really surprised, I think, remember, when you were on the show the next day or around then, we were surprised that they were walking around with those... Firstly, they got that information. How did they get that information? Because the cell phone towers were really not hard,
I couldn't get a cell,
And yet that they had the foresight to have these megaphones and wander around and tell everyone this. I mean, they were basically inciting the crowd to then try and, go after Pence. That was the trigger, right? That was what Trump was trying to do.
This guy.
Yeah. They were like, let's, go ahead, try find Pence and it's hanging. That's basically the signal that Trump was sending. That is a very significant moment that we saw that you were able to capture on that video, which I thought was really significant on that day. And then here we are at a somewhat different situation.
I heard that was the next thing I was going to say. That for some reason that video started playing. I don't know if it was in your end. But the guy goes at he said, Mayor Bowser, and there's another guy with a bullhorn, and they were like, they knew something, right? And they were urging people to storm the Capitol all day long. And he said, it's your house, take it back. It's now or never, 1776. But then this guy, who just mysteriously showed up in my ears, said, Mayor Bowser tried to send in the National Guard to shut us down, but the Defense Department said, no, thank you.
Right, I remember that.
Who told him that?
That was interesting too, right? How did they get that
knew
information?
That if the National Guard had come in, they would have been shut down, and there would have been a possible bloodbath, actually. They would have shut it all down, but they were already given orders. Now, somebody I saw today said it wasn't just Chris Miller in the Defense Department. It was also Kash Patel and Watkins or whatever.
There was 5 of them. There were 5 people that Trump was appointed in the waning days of his administration to various posts at the Pentagon.
Yeah.
And that included people like Kash Patel. And it was interesting because I think Kash Patel was also tied to the NSA. And there was
wasn't he the head of it or something? I mean he was about to be the unqualified guys in charge of everything.
He was going to be sort of the deputy NSA person. I don't know. But so he was installed there. And then we found out just yesterday that the NSA or someone at the NSA was actually proposing and maybe was even doing using the NSA data to prove that the elections were stolen. So
that just came out yesterday. Yeah.
So there might be this interesting thread that we haven't yet seen yet. We've seen so many conspiracies here. We've seen the conspiracy that was the actual insurrection, the crowd outside. We've seen the conspiracy that was the false state of electors that happened inside and the pressure on Pence to overturn the election. We've also known that there was a conspiracy leading up to that, to build up and to get fake affidavits and the legal cases. And now we might be seeing another conspiracy where there's probably an NSA Kash Patel attempt to overthrow the election. I mean, they were going at it from every angle.
But on the 12th, there were 3 rallies. The first one was November 14th.
Yeah.
A week after he lost the election. And then November 9th is when he installed everybody in the Pentagon, Defense Department. Right. And in D.C., because it's not a state, the only people who can give the word to the National Guard are the president and then the Secretary of Defense. So they had that covered. There was no way. There were 14 attempts to send in the National Guard request. Please.
Well, you've been very good at pointing this out because I think people still have not figured out what exactly the military was doing on that day. Like, I don't understand yet. I don't understand why the National Guard was on such a low alert level, but also why it took so long to send them in. That was, of course, a big issue. But why all these people are still there? Like the same people, Charles Flynn is still running the Pacific.
They got him out of town. Fast.
Yeah, but he's still there. I mean,
I know.
He's Charles Flynn, and he's like running the Pacific Fleet.
And isn't some lawyer from the NSA, some other kind of felon is in there still? There's so many of them still there.
I think they are. I think of the one you're talking about. I can't remember his name, but yes, there is one of them that's there. So,
I think all of this conversation just really underscores how critical it was for Democrats to establish the January 6th committee, because I think in a different time, right, we would have had a 9/11 style commission, bipartisan, looking into this. And at the time you had media, you had people like Politico, which, obviously has its own reputation, but, suggesting that this wouldn't be a legitimate process if we didn't accept putting Jim Jordan on this committee, when just today we found out that Jim Jordan had a 10-minute conversation with Trump on the day of the attack. So I think just, looking back, just a little over a year ago, and how crazy it would have been to let this go and let this not, go investigated for the last year. I mean, it's just so important what Nancy Pelosi did.
Absolutely. And, it was underscored today or yesterday when they issued in the Republican caucus, issued that censure of the 2 congressmen who are supportive of the committee to investigate Jan 6. I mean, and that censure was so weirdly worded that it's almost like the entire party has decided that they're just voluntarily going to admit that they are no longer hold up democratic principles. I mean, they say they support the Constitution, but then they go on to say that the insurrection was fine, that it was perfectly normal. But that it's against the Constitution to have an insurrection. They're not allowed to do that. That is the clear rule.
Giuliani apparently said when Trump lost, he just said, "Say you won."
Yeah, but I mean,
and that's what they did. It's been stolen, and over and over and over again.
Yeah, but the goal of the caucus, I mean, these are sitting Congress people that have been elected to these positions. They have no reason to be doing anything but following the law, which is the Constitution. That's what they swear to do. And then off they go and censure the 2 people who are actually upholding the Constitution while they're busy promoting a dictatorship. I mean, literally a dictatorship.
It's hard to believe.
It's alarming because just like you say, right, Giuliani advises him just to say whatever, because I think that behavior has been really rewarded for Republicans. Like we see even now, I think you mentioned the censure, which is somewhat ironic given all the backlash and the hullabaloo about, Spotify and people can't in the private sector, deciding they don't want to pay for a personal individual subscription to a private service. Meanwhile, you have the Republican Party literally banning books via legislation, banning teaching history, and officially censoring anyone that dare disagree or stand up for democracy. And that's actually the scary type of censorship that we've somehow allowed media to lose sight of. And now it's this tit for tat of, this cancel culture is like gone out of hand. What about all of those alarming behaviors? That's really what we should be talking about and focusing on. And instead, it's a 24-hour news cycle every day about, a Democrat or a random person didn't like this and, the left is so intolerant. So I think, unfortunately, Republicans somehow managed to control that dialogue, and we need to really be vocal to take back the narrative.
I agree with you. I think that, this whole idea that they are opposed to cancel culture, but they're busy canceling everything is ridiculous,
Yeah.
If we look at the laws that they just passed in Tennessee. Is that the law in Tennessee? There's one in Florida that was pretty wild. But the one in Tennessee where they basically anyone carrying a gun could be considered law and order. So white people who would get gun licenses can walk around with their guns and do whatever because they are law enforcement now, apparently. Where people who can't get guns, well, they're the criminals. So, it's clearly another, dog whistle kind of racist law that they're instituting there. And we're seeing that kind of legislation being passed around the country. And, these are apartheid-like laws. These are not, they're not even pretending not to be apartheid-like laws. They really are. This is what apartheid looked like. This is exactly, the kind of stupid laws that they start passing because they have to justify their system. And,
they're becoming diminishing. That white people are going to be the minority. Maybe we are already. That's what they're terrified about.
I know they're terrified of it, but this is hardly a solution. I mean, this is, driving the country into an absolute crisis as they've been doing for the last few years is insane. That's no way to solve the problem, in my opinion, but that's, clearly not theirs. I want to actually take a look at some of these memos, if you don't mind, because I did pull them up. These are the ones from the NSA document. I haven't even read them yet, so I just want to quickly peruse them with you guys, because I do think they're really interesting. So this is the counter-election fraud. This is dated December 18th, 2020, which is incredible. This is the day they had that meeting. This is the day that Sidney Powell and Michael Flynn and the other crowd arrived at the White House to convince the President of the United States, the then sitting President of the United States, to basically overthrow the government using the Jan 6th date as the day to do it. And that's when he proved that. That's the day that whole plan was set into motion. And it's interesting here because they said, so we're requesting POTUS instruct Acting Secretary of Defense Christopher C. Miller to bring in these three cleared individuals to form a core advisory team to the White House, the SecDef and DNI regarding foreign interference in the 2020 election. And then it's saying this Commander Frank Colon, USN, current DOD Senior Legal Counsel for Offensive Cyber Support. So then it gives you these three names. So it's this Colon guy, and then Richard Higgins, and Michael Del Rosso. Now, these two names are very significant. Higgins is a former National Security Council Director for Strategic Planning, very senior guy. But Michael Del Rosso is a former consultant for the U.S. Special Operations Command. He could not be any high up in terms of who he was consulting for, the access that he had. And some people suggest, he might be influenced by other governments as well. So it is interesting to look at this guy here and understand that he's basically a 4-star equivalent. It says, recently vetted Presidential Personnel Office candidate for 4-star equivalent DOD. So he is a big deal. This was not some minor plan. This was a big, big deal. They were going to take all the data available to people. NSA collects everything, right? NSA basically collects the entire, every bit of data out there. And they would have taken that and then they would have used that to prove or claim to prove that they won the elections. It's kind of stunning.
This is so detailed. It's been going on for years, I think.
It has been going on for years.
November. It didn't just happen in November.
No.
I mean, the minute that he lost the election, Roger Stone came up with Stop the Steal maybe before the 2016 election in case he lost, which he would have if the Russians had.
I think it was before the 2016 election. I think
I think you're right. He also came up with build the wall because Trump was too dumb to talk about immigration.
Right.
So it was like, I come from advertising, it was like these advertising slogans.
Yeah.
And, build the wall,
That's all. They give him things in 3 words so that he could remember.
Yeah,
basically.
exactly. And they chant it, lock her up.
Exactly. But, it is interesting that this is such a developed concept they had there. I mean, these are very senior people. These are not just like one guy at the NSA who was going to try get the data. They were going to basically get into everyone's private accounts, everyone in the country's private cell phones, private information. They're going to dip into that big data pond, if you want, and then look for instances where there's potentially fraud or anything like that in the elections. Or who knows whose conversations they might have been able to pick up along the way.
Do you think they really believe it? I mean, do you think they're all true believers, that they had been convinced that the election was stolen, that they were acting out of patriotism?
I think it's a foreign op, and I will. That's just my personal opinion. This whole thing is a foreign op. Everything that happened on Jan 6 is foreign op, and everything that happened with Donald Trump is a foreign op. So, it wouldn't surprise me one bit that that's the case. Yeah. Interestingly here, I'll just read a little bit here about Michael Del Rosso. He's the Vice President and Senior Fellow of the American Strategy Group, a think tank dedicated to understanding the strategic threats to the United States, and a member of the Independent Working Group of Missile Defense. I mean, it's interesting that he's kind of like, they sound to me like these front organizations that sometimes other governments set up in order to give people there was the Dmitry Simes had set up for the Russians. These are very similar type conversations. And then it's also interesting here that he, not only did he have access to the U.S. Special Operations Command, which he advised on critical command level issues at the nexus of intelligence, operations, technology, and policy in support of the command's counter-proliferation and counter-terrorism mission. He also participated in a classified and unclassified DoD and DHS national security initiatives, the USCNS 21 Hart-Rudman Commission, and the chair of the IEEE USA CIPC, was invited to brief the EM, or whatever, these are just all names, but people won't really understand. But then he goes on to say here that Del Rosso has decades of congressional outreach experience working with members and staff in both parties in the areas of critical infrastructure protection. So he's not only connected to DOD, he's only connected to the operatives around the White House who are busy organizing this, but it seems to me that he was also very connected to everyone in Congress. How useful is that in terms of the fact that they had a meeting on the 2 days before, we now found out, on January the 4th.
That's when Chris Miller wrote that memo that told all the cops you can't wear protective gear.
Right. What's also interesting about that, because clearly they're saying here that it's Donald Trump who was directing Chris Miller to take action in that previous memo I just showed you. Yeah. So it's interesting that in terms of who told Chris Miller to have the National Guard step down on that day, it may very well have been Donald Trump who gave him the order. But it had to be,
because I told you in D.C. since 1802, since the National Guard were created to protect. I was actually born in D.C. It's not a state; it's a district, and the National Guard has to go first through the president, and then delegate the next chain of command. Because all day long, in my timeline, where the 14 times that they were fleeing for the National Guard, they would say, "Well, I'll send it up the chain of command." So each time, the first time it was asked for, 1253 was the first breach of the barricades. Yeah. When the Proud Boys and all those guys breached that first barricades on the west side, that's when the National Guard should have been called
Absolutely.
in. Because they were like a mob.
Yeah.
And so the National Guard should have been called in. But the first plea went out 2 minutes later, and to the Sergeant at Arms, because there's a very specific chain of command that the Sergeant at Arms has to talk to somebody else. You can't just call up the president and say, "Send the National Guard has to go through."
Right.
So they were aware of this, acutely aware of it.
Right. And, no, they knew about it before. They had all the knowledge before. They really did. So it's not like they weren't aware at all.
No.
Kaivan?
That's why they were installed.
No, and I think back to the question, of do they really believe it? To some extent, it doesn't really matter. But when you have legislators that were elected on the same ballot as Joe Biden, questioning only the result of Biden's victory, that's a pretty disingenuous thing. And I think, there has been some legislation proposed to not allow people like that to be seated, which I think is a good idea. But what is the real threat is whether or not the people at the top really believe it. millions of their followers do, unfortunately, genuinely buy this disinformation. And you have places like Fox News and even, some aspects of mainstream media perpetuating these dangerous ideas. And this is something that Secretary Clinton called out
wrong with sound
in the final debate, where
I'll take your volume down and you can fix yours.
Debate,
yeah.
She basically says, how incredibly dangerous it was that Trump would not commit to accepting the election results and kept pushing this rigged idea. And that was, years before any of this happened. So this has been sort of a conversation that I think people were kind of slow to take as seriously as we should have.
Yeah, I mean, we still aren't taking it very seriously. I mean, even though we are taking it seriously here, even though the Congress is taking it seriously, we're still not seeing any action by the Department of Justice in terms of any legal action against the actual plotters here, which is sad. I mean, honestly, if no action is taken against Michael Flynn or Roger Stone or Alex Jones, that would be really sad.
Yeah. Let me tell you something. I was at when Epstein was arrested. It was actually, it was the 4th of July. I was in D.C. for Trump's big military 4th of July. Yeah. And he was arrested like the next day. And I went on Monday was the press conference, and the SDNY prosecutor, who was fired, by the way, Trump fired him after this, he said, this operation was so secretive, not even other FBI agents knew. So I keep thinking about that.
Which operation was so secret?
The sting that got Epstein. They arrested him at the airport.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Arrested him at Teterboro. Yeah. So we don't know. Just because it's not on Twitter doesn't mean
I do agree with that.
Not doing it, right? Right.
I think that I have faith that, the Biden DOJ and the New York State, Attorney General, people have every incentive to see accountability here. And these are sort of lifelong public servants who I think understand how serious this is. And just because we're not seeing it happen in real time, it doesn't mean nothing's happening. At the same time, I think it's really valid to understand that people do see, a lack of action publicly, and that itself is unfortunately a problem for the rule of law. I guess sort of two foundations of our criminal justice system are this idea of retribution, and you want to punish somebody who did something wrong, but then also deterrence. And I think people are worried that they're not seeing that sort of swift accountability. And so is there going to be deterrence, or will people feel that they can continue to try to undermine our democratic elections in this way? And I think hopefully soon we'll have more information, but I think a lot of people that are very focused on this seem to have some thoughts that things should be coming hopefully in months.
I mean, hopefully there is. Hopefully there's something happening. I'm just going to pick up on some of the messages that people are sending us on the chat rooms here. So I heard Monique and Dave et al. Today towards the end of the space. This is, I think it relates to Dave Troy's Spaces thing, which is, okay, so yes, I don't know what they said about the truckers, but I am interested in what they said about the truckers.
I think the truckers is an op. The truck is definitely an op.
Yeah, it is. I think it's definitely an op. The question is who's doing it.
Michael Flynn, they had this GoFundMe, $10 million. Where'd that come from? And Jack Posobiec's Twitter page has My Pillow guy saying we have a special discount for Canadians.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
You go over to his page, check it out.
So it's basically an attack on Canada.
Yeah.
Or don't. No.
I mean, who the hell is Mike Lindell? I want to know. I mean, what is that creature? How did he become whatever he is? I mean, I know he runs.
He's very wealthy and will do anything apparently.
It seems so. Trumpism is where nihilism and surrealism meets Nazism. Thank you, Heavenly Dreamer. That's a good one.
Heavenly Dreamer.
And here's another one from Stacy. She's saying our state legislature here in Arizona just forwarded loser gun regulation. It was near impossible to respond to the request to speak system. Maybe I'm not reading that correct. To respond on the request to speak system as a voter this week due to the lag time. Yeah, I mean, Arizona is one of those states which is just unbelievable what's going on in Arizona. I mean, it's just chaos over there, it seems like. Here's one from Marie. She's saying he's an agent of chaos. He says Ukraine and Taiwan would be invaded at the same time. He is, meaning whom? Who's the agent of chaos? It must be Trump. I don't know. Though people have been saying that there could be a dual attack right at the same time, but we're in the middle of the Olympics, so hopefully not.
I have friends in Ukraine now, journalist friends that are over there now.
Oh, it's going to be very, very... I thought the image today of Xi and Putin at the start of the Olympics was chilling. I mean, really, really chilling. There's no, look, these guys are in cahoots with each other for a long time. And everything that's happened in the last, 8 years, really, 8 years probably since 2013, has been their doing, has been their involvement in setting up all these fake candidates and these compromised candidates like Boris Johnson. But, that and Trump, and then you've got, what's happened in the last decade is unbelievable. And it's all due to these two leaders. It's all due to Putin and Xi. And no matter how much we try to placate them, they are forwarding their plan. And
all the cyber, the disinformation amplification, Sobiech and that whole right-wing thing, and they're just Trinidad. I see it. You know what I started to do? When you get some kind of weird, like, spam thing, trying to get you to rage tweet, look and see who they follow. Right, and they will follow Tim Pool, Joe Rogan, Jack Posobiec, Ian Miles Chung. They're all, it's all just information amplification.
It really is incredible, that system they've built.
We are so screwed.
Well, we are a little screwed because the system is so effective. I mean, this amplification system they've built is not, we thought it was just Facebook, but it's not just Facebook. Now we know it's also Spotify, and it probably is a bunch of other things as well, where they're just, no matter where you're looking, they're pushing content at us that is designed to polarize us and designed to create conflict. That is what's the easy thing to do.
I think, unfortunately, on the right, too, there's this overlap between these sort of like legitimate conservative intellectuals, whatever you want to bucket that as, and these conspiracy theories and sort of baiters. Like, I don't know if people followed the recent story with Ilya Shapiro and obviously tweeting that horrible thing about Biden's Supreme Court nominee. And then Mark Joseph Stern, a reporter, kind of called out the tweet. Within 24 hours, you have an entire sort of right-wing blog infrastructure attacking that reporter for just pointing that out. And I've seen it in so many different instances. It's happened to me once or twice before. But you get 10 articles from different sort of like the National Review, et cetera. And these are sort of blogs that somebody like Ben Shapiro will share, but then also, the more fringe people, although I personally consider Ben Shapiro pretty fringe, but, that's somebody I think the New York Times normalizes. And then you have, he has like, I think 2 million followers or something like that. So slowly you kind of have this creep of disinformation blending with,
and Joe Rogan has 11 million followers. And I was at Defeat the Mandate rally that weekend. My head's still spinning. There was the March for Life.
Right.
With the crazy Christians. And then all weekend it was just this insane disinformation thing. And by the way,
So you're saying that Joe Rogan spoke? Why am I hearing myself
Joe Rogan was on the original. He had the guy Malone, who's way out there.
You saw Joe Rogan at one of those rallies leading up to?
No. Joe Rogan was.
No, I think she was just saying.
I found his on the website of Dr. Malone, whatever.
Okay, thank you.
He was originally. They said, he had nothing to do with it. No, that's bullshit. Malone was on his show. He pushed the rally, and then he was on their website as a speaker. I posted it on Twitter.
Oh,
Joe
so you
Rogan
are saying that
Logan.
Malone used Rogan's podcast to promote the rally. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. He had Dr. Malone on. He goes, I don't feel one way or the other. He's an anti-vaxxer. But what's happened is the Stop the Steal movement has been cannibalized or morphed into. I filmed Nick Fuentes at the anti-mandate rallies, the Proud Boys, Baked Alaska. They're all like anti-mandates now.
And they're all coming after the school boards now. I mean, they've gone from vaccines. Now next thing is school boards, and these are people's schools. These are this is the hearts of every community in America, and you've got these. Foreign propaganda machines pushing people into these extreme positions. And you've got people like Fuentes and company showing up, and the Proud Boys showing up at school board meetings or school meetings about masks.
Scott Pressler, who's a really dangerous guy, and he's also been subpoenaed or something. He was an organizer of Stop the Steal. And he says at Gracie Mansion, one of my favorite videos, he goes, and I have a message for CNN, we're coming for your school boards. And what happened was the next week, they started harassing this, having scenes at the school boards, and then these signs about the Nuremberg Codes all over the country. I saw them in New York, and at the same time, all over the country, the Nuremberg Codes.
Tell everyone again what the Nuremberg Code was.
I don't know. It's apparently after World War II, and they tried everybody in Nuremberg.
I remember this.
It said they have pictures of Fauci dressed as Mengele at the mandate thing, and all these wearing yellow stars and all this Nazi stuff, which is just fear porn.
Right. The Nuremberg Code, I think, was that basically if you followed orders, you were still responsible, basically. So if you were
experiment on humans,
you couldn't. You commit crimes, basically, because the Nuremberg trials took place right after the World War II, and the people who are taking orders would say, "Hey, I was just following orders, so therefore I'm not responsible for the crimes."
Right. Oh, I see. I didn't know that. But there's 10 of them.
Right. Okay.
So I asked the guy. The first time I saw the sign, it was all handwritten, and I said, "What does that mean?" And somebody said, "It's World War II. Google it."
Right.
And they have no idea. But this guy had all 10 of them, and I said, "Where did you get that?" And he says, "Facebook." So I go into Facebook and I look up Nuremberg codes, and who comes up? Dr. Simone Gold.
Ah,
and
yes.
She was on the steps of City Hall, the Doctors Without Ethics or whoever they were, on the steps of, not City Hall, of the Supreme Court, talking about, the guys in the white coats. Remember that? And one of them is now the Florida Attorney General or something.
Well, I mean, there is that whole anti-vaxxer movement. Was that the anti-vaxxing? That was the start of that movement, right?
Well, it started with anti-vaxxing, but then they found out, well, no, that's not going to work because people are actually getting vaccinated. So it went into, well, we're not against vaccine, we're against mandating it.
Right. So that Simone Gold thing, that doctor organization that she created, we were able to track back where they were getting their talking points. And their talking points are basically coming out of this guy from I think it was the Dominican Republic. We looked a lot to all of us like a Russian asset of some sort. And they basically held this convention where all these doctors went to. And that's where they got all these talking points. And then within weeks, it was spread everywhere. Yeah, all that stuff.
She first was talking about hydrochloroquine. And then Trump, parrots it.
Yeah.
He responded.
It's designed for him.
The doctor that he had, that was crazy.
I mean, remember the bleach under the skin? I mean, the amazing thing is that people would consider wanting to bring him back to power. And this guy was the worst president in history, obviously. Obviously, you can't say he wasn't. And people would still consider re-electing him in parts of this country.
Well, I think what's scary is just how many people have a financial incentive to be doing this. I think there's few people that have gotten rich off telling people take a vaccine, pay attention to science. But there's a lot of people that have gotten really rich and made a ton of money and huge followings from spreading this misinformation. And I think that's where people like I'm sure all of us want to keep an eye on places like YouTube and Google and Spotify, because without that incentive structure, I think a lot of that disinformation goes away, and we've seen that happen. So, I think it's more just about who can hold these massive platforms accountable and demand better, because obviously bad actors are going to exploit that as much as they can.
We did see some good news this week out of Facebook. Not good news for them, bad news for them, but good news for us, because the stock price went down 20%. That's basically Apple did that, right? Apple basically took away some of their permissions to monitor our every move on our phones.
Is that
and because they took away those permissions, that's why and
user growth, for the first time in history, their user growth slowed. So they've had increasing growth since their existence. I think for the last 18 years it was, and then this is the first month where their daily users went down. So
wow,
it sucks to be Zuck today.
Yeah, and I think it just shows you that you can sort of whack away these one-off outrage bursts that happen or media scandals, but for a sustained year plus, maybe even 3 years now, Facebook has really shredded its goodwill and its reputation.
Absolutely.
And of course, it's going to catch up at some point. So,
this is no coincidence. It's not a coincidence. I mean, they were the vehicle that elected Donald Trump in 2016. That's how
right. I mean, they sold ads allowing you to target white supremacists, basically. Yeah. And if that's your business model, I mean, I don't know how you sleep at night, but also I'd like to think that our country's better than that.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think we've got these things I don't believe happened by accident. I think there's a coordinated effort to basically, bring Facebook to account for itself. Otherwise, if you don't do that, can you imagine what the next iteration is once they do launch Meta or whatever it is they're launching? How much scarier does it get when they use the same ethics and principles to guide them in a virtual world? It would be a nightmare.
Well, and I think what's also alarming is if you look at Mark Zuckerberg, or you look at Jack, who ran Twitter, or you look at the Spotify CEO, first of all, they're all sort of the same demographic. But then I think a a lot of these founder stories turn out to be somebody who is pretty smart, who is good at coding, who understands one thing, which is technology and their product. And then it becomes huge and it becomes, this social, juggernaut type thing. And they don't have the sociology exposure, or they don't know anything about how to moderate a platform, or, what democracy should be, or what responsible sort of platforming is. And they think they're brilliant. And, you can't really stop them and say, okay, but, actually just some freshman level idea of free speech that, a 19-year-old has in, intro to political science is really not a thoughtful way to respond to these criticisms. And I do feel like intellectually, that's where people like that are at. I mean, just look at Elon Musk, right? Like, imagine somebody like that, somebody so immature, who really doesn't know a lot about the world. And I think you can see that in the way he engages. It's scary how much power he has.
Yeah, he does have an enormous amount of power. And I think what you're saying is right. I think they take a lot of these really smart kids. I think they get, supported by maybe people with less than noble intentions, and they build them up into, first, the icons, but they don't really have the power. Like, I don't think that Zuckerberg really runs Facebook. I think it's Sandberg that runs Facebook. I think
maybe it'd be better if Sandy was running
Sandy
Facebook.
was running it pretty fine.
I'm not doing anything.
Fine. That's the way it should be.
5,000 friends. Wait a minute.
But it's I think it's Sheryl Sandberg that's actually calls the shots there. I mean, firstly, there's this whole weird history.
Passive aggressive. Yeah,
I'm going to tell the story of Sheryl Sandberg on another day, but there's a weird history there. Karen's saying Russians understand what makes Americans tick, similar to ad agencies. Our weaknesses, passions, etc. They have exploited them all through their domestic cutouts, through Tucker and Rush, etc. 100%. That's exactly what's happening.
Remember Rush?
Yeah. How are we going to get?
Sarah Palin's in town. She really started the whole.
She could see Russia
saying shocking stuff that Trump just ran with. Remember when she used to just say the most off the wall stuff?
I remember that whole campaign. I covered that at CBS. That was insane. That was really interesting. Right. They actually, back then when they still had a responsible GOP, it was the GOP that killed Sarah Palin's and that whole campaign. Like internally, they thought she was such a terrible candidate that the campaign staff actually created the whole event that allowed her to go down and allowed the McCain campaign.
They made a movie about that.
But there was an internal move by responsible people inside the campaign. Some of them on TV these days.
Oh, I know that.
And yet, right now, look at the GOP. Doesn't have a moral backbone to speak of. Andrea says, why didn't the MSM write about Zuckerberg getting lots of dollars from Russia in 2010 and links to the 2016 election? I don't know why they didn't write about it. I know I wrote about it, and I have no idea when. They haven't written about it. It's pretty clearly outlined that Yuri Milner gave them a lot of money. There's more about Yuri Milner too. Yuri Milner is also really not just Yuri Milner. Yuri Milner is probably tied to the Russian intelligence services. So,
do you know who introduced Pence to Trump?
I do know.
Manafort,
I know. I broke that story too.
You did?
I did. Back in the day.
I was at the press conference where they announced Pence, and he gets up there and he goes, I'm a Christian, I'm a conservative, and I'm a Republican, in that order, he said.
I remember him saying that at another conference. I think that some anti-LGBT conference that he was at.
Oh, yeah, it was just horrible.
It's just unbelievable, some of this. But you're right. I mean, why has the media missed so many of these stories? It's stunning still that we still don't know that there's no mention yet that Russia has so much control over Zuckerberg in any mainstream media, which really makes you wonder who's running the mainstream media. Who owns the mainstream media? That's just really a big question, because none of the stuff ever gets on the air there. What else we got here? One more from Troy, who just tweeted that Pence is the choice of the Kochs. Oh, interesting.
Koch brothers, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. And then one more, I think this is just a follow-on from Karen here. It's the ridiculously zealot-like candidates for the Supreme Court feel like a backhanded dissolution of the court's power. The right is killing democracy by 1,000 cutouts. 100%.
Federalists, yeah. But, I mean, the fact that he'd said that, that was completely vetted and staged. That he said
Pence
that
today?
Donald Trump was wrong. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm very encouraged. I mean, believe me, I need to be encouraged by that.
We just got to take a look at it one more time, because it is kind of amazing. It is amazing that Mike Pence said these words, because for 4 years we just saw him, groveling in front of Donald Trump, and anything he said was absolutely godly and perfect, according to Pence. But here he is saying that President Trump is wrong. I had no right to overturn the election. And then he says, the presidency belongs to the American people and the American people alone. And frankly, there is no idea more un-American than the notion that any one person could choose the American president. Yeah. Of course, as far as I'm concerned, I think the orders came from...
Tell that to Justice Rehnquist. No.
Right. well,
they know Trump's going to get indicted. He's going to get indicted somewhere. He's going to get indicted by the Manhattan DA, Georgia. Yeah. January 6th, will put it onto the Department of Justice. Somebody's going to get him. And I think they know it. I predict they're going to cut their losses, but what do I know?
I think he's going to get indicted as well. I'm not sure he's going to get indicted on a federal level. I just don't see it, but who knows? I mean, there's so much new evidence every day. This stuff about the NSA really takes it to a whole new level. I mean, that's not your typical, it's not even a normal coup. Now we're talking about a whole new, tech level coup where you're spying on Americans and stealing their private data it's just unbelievable. It's really, how much valuable data would they have gotten out of that if they'd gotten permission during that period of time?
We don't know what they have. We don't know what they've got already, What did Trump give them all those years?
Exactly. So, I mean, I think, who knows, maybe as this gets more interesting, because I think a lot of this information is very new. The fake slate of electors is new to the commission. They only found out about it a few weeks ago. So now, they're building their knowledge, and I'm sure the DOJ is learning as it's going along. I mean, some of the stuff may not have been apparent to them either. So, maybe
and the New York case, the New York case, which will probably be RICO, the stuff they got Avenatti on.
Avenatti was sentenced today, I think.
Wire fraud.
Yeah.
Right? Not sentenced, but found guilty.
It was found guilty today, yeah. It's just so interesting. I'm smiling a little bit. That's how I feel about Avenatti. Because, what a schmuck.
Well, it's grifter heaven this last 5 years.
Remember there was like a 5-minute period when Avenatti was going to run for the presidency?
Yes.
And people were like, oh yeah, he could really be the president.
He's good. I met him.
I will say I think there's a fundamental difference between the parties, because I think a lot of times people say, oh, this is just the moment we're in. But I think that somebody like Avenatti was not going to succeed in the Democratic Party for long, whether or not he had these legal issues, because at the end of the day, I think Democratic voters do have some baseline values that are not on the other side, period. And we're not looking for some carnival barker who can just get elected. It's got to be somebody that can deliver on, the initiatives that are important for our democracy and
actual policies, actual real policies. The problem is, I don't think the other side is that. I mean, I think there's good people on both sides, right? It's just that they don't have an option. I think the entire GOP is so corrupt that they don't even get the chance to vote for people who aren't corrupt. And given the chance and given a fair shot at it, they might do it. It's not, there's a sense amongst Democrats that, I don't want to use the word deplorables, but there's that sort of sense around the Republicans in the red states that, they just sort of, you can't get to them and they're beyond reproach. And that's just not true. I think there's lots of people in the middle of the country that would like to vote Democratic, and they often don't get a candidate to vote for, and they don't get the political muscle in those communities to vote for them. So
what do you think would take for them to, what could happen to Trump that his base would go,
well, I think what I think needs to go, what needs to go is the ecosystem that's projecting this information into their worlds. I mean, they're living in a false reality, in my opinion.
Fox.
So, Fox, Newsmax, OAN, the Facebooks, you name it, whatever's being thrown at them on a daily basis as their own media system. They watch different media than we do. So,
but I think also almost nothing is the answer to that question. That's because I think what history has shown about sort of these sort of populist or pseudo-populist movements is that it's actually a little bit less about the person that they channel it through and more about these people sort of giving up their self, like they don't like their life, their state of things, and becoming this mass identity. And I think like when you look at the hats, right, like the red hats, like that's so telling. That's part of that. It's like they're part of something. Right. So it's really less.
It's like a tailgate party.
Right. Exactly.
It's like a huge, that's what the rallies are about.
Well, I think you're right there. And it's also the churches. I think there's a lot of it's happening in churches. A lot of it's happening in community centers. I mean, community events like the schools and things like that. A lot of the politics is getting passed down through there as well.
Unless a P-tape or something came out, let's say.
Nothing
and they would say it was doctored, I mean, they won't, I've talked to them, for years.
Yeah, you have.
Talked to the QAnons. And by the way, there hasn't been a QAnon drop for a year. Mission accomplished January 6th.
Well, they moved on to vaccines and school boards. 6th. Oh, really?
No, there hasn't been after January 6th, I believe. somebody could correct us.
Well, that's really interesting. So what you're saying, the entire QAnon thing was just to get us to January the 6th. That was the whole.
Yes,
that was the mission.
I believe so. Yeah, that was mission accomplished. That's just my theory. Just because I've interviewed QAnons around the country, and one of them in Minneapolis, I was invited on a bus trip by this guy, Front Row Joe. And he's the biggest MAGA of all. He'd been to every single Trump rally, and I interviewed him at one rally, and then I saw him in another one. He said, "You're the only journalist that has shown us for who we are." Right. So I just turned my camera on, Well, and we went to Milwaukee, which is QAnon Central, and I always ask them, "How did you get into it, and when?" They all say October 28th, 2017, and one guy said, they usually say 4chan. One guy said 4chan. And Guccifer 2.0.
Right. Which was basically how we got WikiLeaks, right? I mean, that was the origin of that. Yeah, and
the producer of the PR guy for the mandate thing, I forget his name right now, but he was WikiLeaks PR guy. And really? Seth Rich, and he pushed the Seth Rich story. I forgot his name.
That is really interesting.
Yeah, because I want to know who paid for it, because it was so extravagantly produced.
Sandy, so who's this person here? Do you recognize this person?
Look, I'll do my look.
See, Sandy is a baby.
That's an elephant. My dad put me against that's a Ringling Brothers elephant, 1945.
Okay, 1945. Wow, look crazy? At that. What a great picture.
So you guys, don't ever say you're too old. I don't want to hear that from anybody.
That's what is so inspiring about your stories, that you, in your 50s, were like down and out, and
no, I lost everything. I got evicted in my 60s.
Right.
I was run over by a car. I didn't walk. I had a crook lawyer who took all my money and got me evicted. I had no friends.
Yeah.
I had no friends. Now I have too many friends.
You have so many friends. You got 130,000 followers or something. You recreated your life from a copyright. You were a copywriter, and then
I was a producer.
Sorry,
I'm a producer.
Yeah.
Like you.
And then for advertising though, and then you decided to become a journalist, which is amazing.
Well, I had no choice. I lost everything, but I had a camera, Find what you love. Get a camera. Take your iPhone, hold it sideways, and do it 10,000 times, and you'll get good at it.
It's so true. So true. That's the outlier rule. What's happening here?
Yeah, in this exactly. Photo? And that's him. Who's the guy that wrote that?
That was.
Oh shit! That's his line. He's the one that said, "Do it 10,000 times, and you'll get good at it."
Yeah.
Oh, Gladwell.
Yes, thank you.
Gladwell. Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell.
Thank God there's someone who's 28 here and still has a memory. It's necessary. What's happening in this photo here? What's happening in this photo here?
That's me at the Cincinnati Reds.
Okay. When was that?
It was a commercial with Pete Rose. He's not in this. And it was for Vitalis Dry Control. And
look at you with the entire team there.
1971. I was so hot.
You were hot. I got to say, I didn't want to say that because I'm not sure you can say that anymore.
Now.
But
I had no idea at the time.
You were so hot.
Yeah, I was hot. And we all were. I mean, it was the craziest time, the 70s.
Yeah. Well,
please.
Yeah. I want to hear those stories, but maybe we'll have to wait for an after show to figure all those out. We're out of time. I've had so much fun with you guys tonight. I'm sorry
you too, dear. Thank you so much.
So quick.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Thank you.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. Kaivan Shroff. I'm going to say it again. Kaivan Shroff. Oh, I'm so sorry I got it wrong. I almost got it right though.
No worries. You are not the first.
Kaivan, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you online and so they can follow you on Twitter?
Yes. So it's just my name at Kaivan Shroff. And I think it's got the spelling up there. So hope to join the conversation on Twitter after.
Yeah, Kaivan's got a great feed.
So nice to meet you.
You too.
Yeah, I don't have to go anywhere. This is great.
Sandy, everyone can find you at Sandi Bachom. Everyone knows where you are, but just tell everyone again. It's just
Sandi Bachom, at Sandi Bachom on Twitter and my website. But I don't know why you would want to do that, but if you want to see what I've done for the past 50 years. You have a good YouTube account as well, which is quite enjoyable. Since YouTube started taking down all of my QAnon stuff and our January 6th stuff, I don't use them anymore, which is a shame because it's a revenue. I make my living such as it is from licensing my footage, and now nobody knows. Well, now they know that they can come to you here because you just advertised it. So there you go. That's the after show for tonight, everyone. Thank you very much for being here. We'll be back Tuesday on the Narativ Live. Have a good weekend, everybody. Thanks a lot.
Narativ is made possible by viewers like you. You too can support our independent journalism by going to www.patreon.com/Narativ.